Welcome to another edition of the Mexican Soccer Show. I'm Cesar Hernandez, your host, and today we're diving into the noteworthy arrivals of James Rodriguez and Sergio Ramos in Liga MX, what it means for the league, what it means for the clubs, and then we'll close out the pod with some talk on El Tri, Santi Gimenez, a little bit of the CONCACAF Champions Cup, and my usual co-host Lizzie Becherano. She's out for the day. Actually, congrats to her. Maybe not congrats. I think she's looking at some housing. Anywho, Lizzie, congrats on you finding a new spot to move into or looking at a new spot to move into. But the big news on who else is actually here alongside me is that we have a return of an OG member of the Mexican Soccer Show. It's Nayib Moran. Nayib, welcome back, man. I know the big talking point is James and Sergio Ramos, but obviously the big talking point is that you're back for good, man. You're not just a guest. You're back on the pod, man. Welcome back.
Well, look, it's been a while, Cesar. It's been one of those things. It's been exactly 7 years, I think, since I left
7 years. Oh
the
my
Mexican soccer show. So I left in 2018. I was in Mexico City. Now I'm in New Jersey. We're technically very, very close to a World Cup in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. The final will be played in New Jersey in MetLife Stadium. And so, I saw it as appropriate, to hop back on. I missed it, of course, it was a home for so many years. So when I decided to leave in 2018, I always knew that there was going to be a moment where the possibility to come back was there, And so right now, I've been viewing the game. I've been also recording on the side my show Resortera Wave in the last years or so with the Máquina Ian Oscar. So I've been around, I've been talking and every but the home where a lot of my career in the Mexican game and the Mexican journalism in English started in the Mexican soccer show. So it's really nice to join you, Cesar, and it's really nice also to get the chance to meet Lissy and everyone. But it was always home, and I'm really happy to be, chatting with you again.
dude, it's incredibly nice to have you back, and it was incredibly nice just like the other day, just to like just chill and just chat for a bit as well. Like even like in a non-recording like situation, like it was super cool. And speaking of recording, I mean, just to be like transparent, Naibu was the one who like he reached out to me. He asked me like what the state of the pod was, and I told him, well, we're recording once every 8 years because of the current rate that we're at. And he was like, well, what if I come back? Get the ball rolling a little more often. So I think that's what we're going to try to do. I think we're still figuring out, obviously, our schedules, what that means, how often we record. But I think ultimately, I think it seems like we came to a consensus here that we do want to record more often. And once again, just being transparent, I told Naive too that like, to be perfectly honest, I was slacking a little bit with these recordings, and I think that it'll be good to have you back, not just because it's cool to hang out with you and it's nice to hang out with you and chat Mexican soccer, but I know that's going to be like a personal like catalyst of sorts to really
Yeah,
get me
no,
going
and
to
and
record it more often.
to our OG listeners, and whoever listens to this podcast, this one particular, thank you for always being there.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think we were part of the movement in the early years, but if the movement existed, it was because of the people that listened to this show that
Hmm.
propelled us to
Hmm.
be and to do a lot of this stuff. A lot of people that were at this show have gone on to do amazing things. No, so I think it's been really, really special, and hopefully we can maintain it, like you say, Cesar, with the
Hmm.
best
Hmm.
of our abilities, and hopefully we can put out content out there like we have always have. No.
100%, 100%. And we're going to try a new format as well. I think in the past, Liz and I, we kind of went through just we gave about like 15 minutes each to a few different talking points. Now you brought up a good point where I think we want to try sticking with one big talking point to kick off the show, and that'll take up the bulk of the conversation here, and then we'll close out with a few updates. So we're about to dive into that, but again, Naib, welcome back, man. So glad to have you back, and so glad to dive into this once again. Just because, like, once again, like we'll dive into right a little bit here, like about James and Ramos, but like I it's like easy to forget that like back in my like younger days when I was like living in Northern California, like I remember I would listen to you and Tom and Eric, and it was just like a weekly thing. I was like, I think you guys might have done like bi-weekly, but that might have been weekly. But it was like a big deal, like listening to the Mexican soccer show on my way to work when I used to be a counselor at a group home, and it was like it's pretty cool to like have you back on the pod just because it's that connection from the early days of like where the show was at and where it is now, and it's just I don't know, it's just it's cool just to have you back on the pod, man.
No, no, and it's amazing. No, when I hear those stories, it really it shows a lot because when I was recording those episodes, I was in college. I was in a
Yeah.
dormitory. I remember, and so
Yeah.
like it takes me back to those days. But like I said at a part, is this show allowed us to live great experiences. No, for
Yeah.
example, you, Cesar,
Yeah.
you already covered the World Cup. That is one of the
Yeah.
biggest things a journalist, soccer journalist, aspires to do. No, um, and I think that says a lot about what this Mexican soccer show family has been
Hmm.
for many of us. No.
100%, 100%. And it's just like it's been. I mean, the number of people who've been on this show, the number of people who've like either been co-host or guests who have gone on to do bigger things is like it's pretty incredible. So, but yeah, man. So thank you for being part of that foundation. Let's just say that thank you for being part of that foundation, the pod. But although maybe at this point, people who are listening to the pod will be like, all right, they're both saying like how much they care about each other. That's great. That's awesome. 6 minutes, almost 7 minutes in the pod. Let's talk about the big things. So if you're ready, Naive, let's talk about the big talking point.
Let's go.
So, for those who missed the news, Leon made headlines in January after signing former La Liga player and 33-year-old James Rodriguez. And then in February, Rayados made just as big of a splash after signing arguably an even more prominent player, 38-year-old Sergio Ramos. So, Naib, just to kick things off, I want to get your initial thoughts. What were the initial thoughts when you saw either the first of these moves or both of these moves into Liga MX?
It's they were intentions, big intentions from both clubs. No, I
Mm-hmm.
think it was very important the fact that both will be in the Club World Cup. That's a
Yeah.
good selling point for both sides. I think Leon has accustomed us with these splashes. Rafa Marquez coming back, Andres, who announced his retirement, but because I guess James was coming, he decided to postpone the retirement and return back to the field. Let's not forget, Leon brought Landon Donovan to
I
Mexico,
was about to
which
bring up
was,
Landon. Yeah.
it's a big thing to, for us as a rivalry and everything. But Leon always has thought outside the box, just do something big. Um, but this one in particular, James is, for some reason, the best player in the Copa America that recently happened in the US, but also it seems that when he plays for Colombia, he's one player, and then when he plays for his club, he's another player. No, he's not
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
outstanding player that you see with Colombia. I think what has been successful so far, and we'll talk a little bit about it, is the fact that he landed in Leon, and it's the same guy we see with Colombia. With the moves and also the assist on corner kicks. I mean, it seems like he has one of the most gifted left foots out there in the game. The Rayados with Ramos, it's historic also. It's a guy that won a Champions League, well, many Champions Leagues, and a World Cup already. We got to see the setting also. Monterrey, as a city in Mexico, it's always competing with Tigres, no? It's like, what you do, I'll do better, and vice versa, no? They recently reached the final, and I think that says a lot about, their big roster, with Sergio Canales and Oliver Torres, two Spaniards that were already there, and also I think played a significant role for Ramos to say yes to Monterrey. But what I see here is these intentions to garner attention, but they are also helped by the fact that those two teams are in the Club World Cup. I don't know if those
Yes.
moves happen if the Club World Cup doesn't exist.
100%. And I think that like that's also important to bring up. But I want to go back to something you brought up earlier, which you were talking about what James has already shown on the field. Because I think what stands out to me is this isn't just about big name bringing attention to this club. Big name who's going to help sell out tickets, not just for the local club, but for away teams. When they go visit like different teams across Liga MX. These are also players that, like James, have been really impressive. Like it's not he's. I had my doubts at first. I wondered if there was a little too much hype about the 4-minute mini movie that Leon did announcing announcing his arrival. That was very gladiator like. Actually, it was gladiator. What I mean, it was
Yeah.
actually gladiator like. But the thing is like he's been legit really good. He's had 2 goals, 4 assists in his last 7 games. And I say those stats, and that doesn't really cover the full aspect of what he's been providing for the team as a captain, because he's stepping in actually in the midfield as a captain for this team. And you can see the leadership that he provides. And from Ramos, it's a small sample size, but I have been impressed, or was impressed, by his game against Atletico San Luis. Yes, it's and Atletico San Luis side, who you could say that for the most part, they're kind of, if we're looking at who they are over the last few years, it's kind of like make it into the playoffs and maybe make a
Yeah.
little bit of noise, and that's about it at best. But I know he was great in the air. His passing was
One of
really
the
good.
things
So
I
yeah,
think,
yeah,
Cesar, one of the things that differentiates James with Ramos is that James arrives at a club that doesn't have as much star power as
yeah,
Monterrey.
yeah.
Monterrey,
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Monterrey is sort of like Ramos is like a finishing piece to the puzzle, you can say, sort
Mm-hmm.
of.
Mm-hmm.
And you still have your doubts, no, because the back line of Monterrey is old. The Michelis hasn't been a manager that has been so consistent with his, planning and tactically, not as strong, even though they reached the final last season, but it's still not convincing for the squad that he has. I mean, because it's just
Mm-hmm.
insane who he has on the bench and who he can put as a starter, no?
Yeah,
The possibilities are endless. With Leon, it's sort of like you bring in James and you're gonna play around James. Everyone
yes.
plays for James. That's the idea of Toto Berizzo, and that's why Cadiz is shining. The Venezuelan striker, Steven Mendoza, the Colombian, is flying on the wing because James is there. James makes them better players than what they
Mm-hmm.
actually
Mm-hmm.
are, and I think that is what differentiates the James with the James signing to the Sergio Ramos. Of course, Sergio Ramos will also be captain, a lot of leadership. Um, but we'll find out, especially in the Liguilla, that's where it will count more, and see how Ramos will sort of propel Monterrey in those critical scenarios. Also in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, no?
Mm-hmm. I think that's actually something I didn't even think about, because like obviously I think about them as like the two kind of like same kind of stories, like 2 big names arriving in Liga MX who are making a lot of attention, who have, let's say if we're including Ramos's like debut, who did well, who have so far have done pretty well. But that's actually an excellent point about how they actually do have very different roles. That
Yeah,
if Rayados miss out on Sergio Ramos in the starting 11, like they did in their last game, right? I mean, we could talk about that one game,
yeah.
but in a number of, let's just say in a number of games going forward, if they miss out on him, is it a big deal? Yes, it is to an extent, but not nearly as big of a deal as a James, who's literally in that heart of that starting 11, who's been given the 10, who is the captain, who are just like, okay, you are the conductor here. You are figuring things out. You are making, we're not only like relying on you to like possibly find the back of the net, but to also be a provider of the ball. And also in those situations too, with finding the back of the net, I think his first goal, if I remember correct, was off a penalty, where it's just like, all right, here you go. This is your opportunity here to
Yeah.
really step in and really to really like make your stamp. So I think that's actually a really good point that I never even thought about. That yes, it's two. They're 2 players with 2 big impacts, but they have 2 very different roles. And I've never even thought about that.
Yeah, no, and look, Monterrey is an interesting situation with Tato Noriega. I mean, I think Tato has done an excellent job getting whatever players out there. Specifically, you can say he's been looking a lot at Sevilla Football Club and Betis because
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the amount that he's brought from over there. But Tato before Monterrey, he was an analyst with ESPN. So he has observed a lot, La Liga in general. So he knows what, the players and their talents and so forth. But the thing also with Monterrey that is very specific is they got a lot of talented young Mexican footballers, no?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
Fidel
Mm-hmm.
Ambris, Victor Guzman, to name two, even Iker, the kid that came out last season was amazing. But at the same time, you got so many veterans and sort of foreign talent that is very very expensive that you got to put to play. You can't get, for example, Nelson de Osa from Pachuca and leave him on the bench.
Right.
You got to
Right.
start him.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's sort of like it's a very very difficult dynamic in Monterrey, that you have the pressure of winning because you got to do something better than Tigres has done in the last years, and they haven't. That's the reality. They haven't really matched that dominance that Tigres has shown when Gignac arrived. And
Yeah.
right now, when we're talking about James and Sergio Ramos, well, the originator, a lot of all this was Gignac when he arrived to Mexico, and the international impact he caused for the league. Was it
Mm-hmm.
used properly? You can say maybe not so well. But
Right.
there are certain elements that Gignac brought with him that really put light on Mexico that wasn't there before, no?
100%. And I think that also speaking of those young games, you could also bring up Tony Leon, a Mexican American player who is kind of
Yeah,
seen
yeah,
as a
from
kind of like up and
LAFC,
coming
no?
defender. Yeah, I think there's also we conclude. But I think you mentioned Gignac there, and I think that could kind of like pivot us to a question that I had. Um, it's Gignac. He's going to be he is either about to be 40 or is already 40 years old. You look at Sergio Ramos, who's 38 years old. Yes, James is a little bit younger in his 30s, but he's still 33 years old, about to turn 34 this year. Does that do you think that this levels up Liga MX, but also kind of make it or reinforce the idea of it's more of a retirement league? How do you feel when people talk about the idea of
Yeah.
Liga MX possibly being a retirement league? I'm curious about what you think about that when it comes to bringing in players like that, because also like I'm getting ahead of myself here because I see that and then I see let's look at a different team who's going to be the Club World Cup, a Pachuca who they bring in someone like a 22-year-old John Kennedy, a Brazilian player. I think he's from Botafogo.
Fluminense.
Fluminense. Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
That's the one. Yeah, that's
yeah,
what it is.
yeah.
And that kid's been
He's
fantastic.
a
That's
baller.
that gets me. Yeah. So I don't know. So I wonder what you think about that when it comes to the ages of these players. What's the right age? Does this make it Liga MX a retirement league, more of a retirement league? What are your thoughts on that?
Essentially, I think, Cesar, the league needs to find or figure out its essence or what it wants to
Yeah.
portray. No,
Yeah.
because right now MLS, for example, what I've noticed, when you look at their most expensive signings this season from Atlanta and from Cincinnati, they're African players, no,
Hmm.
and young African players,
Hmm.
and that's a market that Mexico has never paid attention to. There was a time
Yeah.
where America did bring in some African players when Leo Benjaque was manager, but that was like in the 90s.
Hmm.
Kalusha and Oman Bijik. Yeah, and that happened at one point in Mexico, but it didn't continue.
Hmm.
And so with these signings, there's nothing wrong, I think, in bringing these players that are veterans but are still capable to give you something.
Hmm.
By what I mean by that, I'm pretty sure Sergio Ramos is gonna be very influential to Victor Guzman or Fidel Ambris. These young Mexican footballers that are barely starting their careers and having an opportunity of a lifetime to learn from someone like Sergio Ramos.
Hmm.
It's one of the reasons of the success of Pachuca that you bring up. I mean, of course, Kennedy scoring, but Salomon Rondon,
Yes.
who has an impeccable career, played in Russia, played in Everton, other teams in England. He does have a certain element of leadership, no, and he's still playing for Venezuela. Venezuela could potentially play its first World Cup in a couple of years. And a lot of that is due because of Rondon and his professionalism, and that's all the youth system of Pachuca. All the youngsters are learning from that, and I think that's important right now in Mexico
Yeah.
because, as we have seen in the last years, the production hasn't been optimal. No, it hasn't been the best. And if you have that opportunity to bring these players that are still capable to give you something on top of, like, teaching the youngsters, I think it's a win-win. You know, when America brought in someone like Bamban Zamorano and Piojo Lopez, two players that had already did an excellent career in Europe and came to Mexico, they also provided some things. I wouldn't
Hmm.
say a lot, but it was felt, in that team, what Piojo Lopez and Bamban Zamorano provided. So here with James, he's still in a good age, and he's providing, like we've said most of the show so far. It is a tricky ground because I do understand the notion of, like, okay, so is that it? Are you just gonna bring those players? But it also has to do with what do you want to, how do you want to sell your league, no? And
Yeah.
unfortunately, in Mexico, every team works different. Every club
Hmm.
works different in that
Hmm.
way. Not all of them are on the same page, and I think
Yeah.
that is an issue. That is an issue that, in the long run, it does affect you, because right now, when you have Sergio Ramos in Mexico, there are people watching Liga MX that have never watched it before. So how
Hmm.
do you capitalize that? And I think that's where Liga MX struggles a lot, because not all Mexican clubs are on the same page.
And what makes difficult, which is a different conversation altogether, is what makes it difficult. People are like, oh, how do I watch them? It's like, well, this team has this TV package. This
Yeah.
team has that TV package. That team, well, you gotta do blah blah. That makes it difficult too. But I do think that there's a. I mean, I asked the question: is it does it level up Liga MX, but also make it more of a retirement league? That's kind of just wanted to put it out there just to see what you would say. But I think I think we probably both agree that it's just you got to find the right balance, and it's tough to find what that balance is. And you were alluding to
Yeah.
that. That's like you,
And,
you
and
gotta bring the superstars, but also you want to be. I think in an ideal sense, maybe this is me from like a soccer fan perspective. You're like you do what Pachuca do, and you have you allow these young players to have opportunities, but then you surround them with these really with these veteran players who actually buy into the methodology of being like, yes, we're going to help these young players and really guide them. So it's just it's
it,
tough to find
it,
that
it's
balance. Yeah.
hard, and also the market is different now, how it was 10
Yeah.
years ago. 10 years ago, I feel Liga MX clubs had more advantage of recruiting Latin American players, and now
Mhm.
MLS has sort of just the umbrella is just bigger now. Of course, there's
Mhm.
more teams than MLS, but I think the path that we have seen recently in MLS of young Latin American players arriving to MLS and then going to Europe, I think that's going to continuously
Mhm.
grow, and it's going to be a selling point, and I think
Yes.
that's where Liga MX falters a little bit, that you can count with your hand, basically, in the last 5 years how many players have come to Mexico and then moved to Europe. It's not as abundant as you would want. Right now, on top of my head, Maxi Araujo, who was in Puebla first, then went to Toluca, now is in Sporting in Portugal. That's an example,
Yeah.
of someone that worked his tail off and ended up in Europe. But I feel like in MLS nowadays, you see the Paraguayan kid that was in Miami, Gomez, I believe, he's now in Brighton, no, and or Almiron, that came to Atlanta, went to Newcastle, now he's back in Atlanta, no, but he went to Newcastle. So those examples are gonna keep growing, in the MLS market, and it's gonna make it attractive. So that Liga MX clubs now have to figure out. So now, where am I gonna get the players, or what type of
Mhm.
player am I gonna get? You know, Cholos actually this offseason played interesting. Its cards. No, it brought in players from France,
Shamar Nichols, they brought Shamar Nicholson too, and it's
from
just like,
Russia.
yeah.
So you got to think outside the box nowadays, and I think it's gonna be interesting to see how is that gonna look. No.
Mhm. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I talked to a couple GMs recently from MLS, and they both said the same thing about because I asked them like, what is the selling pitch that you have to South American players? Then they both said it's not just South American players, but it's just to any player. They're just like, we could be that trampoline up to Europe. And then like it was from FC Dallas, and I know FC Dallas, and then the other GM that I chatted with. I can't believe I just wrote this article about a couple weeks ago. I
So
forgot who it was.
many
Anyway,
names. I said it happens. It
I
happens.
know.
Yeah, at one
but,
point,
but,
like I know
but,
this guy, but I forget.
but anyway, both GMs were they were just naming like a bunch of players. Just like we sent this player to Europe, we sent that player to Europe, and that is the pitch that they give to a lot of players. They say, hey, you have a great time here. We'll pay you. You'll have a good life out here, have a safe life, and then you just go, and then you're able to go to Europe. I think that's what you then you look at the average age of let's say a league like MLS. Like I was looking at it recently. It was from Transfer Markets from 2024 to 2025. They don't just have 2024 or just 2025, but
No.
the average age is 25.5, and that's why you look at Liga MX, and it's Liga MX is 26.9. At the same time, though, if we're talking about the whole retirement league thing again, you look at La Liga, it's 27.2, Brazil, 27.3. So like I think that's also another thing to keep in mind that yeah, Mexican soccer
But
does need to give
it
more
goes it
opportunity to
goes
your
back
players, but yeah.
it goes back to that idea of the essence. Like, what does it want to portray?
Hmm.
What type of league does it
Hmm.
want to sort of be? No, so
Hmm.
like for example, when you think about the Bundesliga, you do think a lot about the German player, no, or the German coach, and the
Yes.
development of the
Yes.
German player and the development of the German coach. you
Yeah.
know a lot of clubs buy into that, no, and I think that is noticeable when the national team plays. They're always up there competing, sometimes of course not so well, but they're all most of the part. In the last 100 years Germany has been there, no.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very difficult because economically you can say Liga MX is very, very healthy, no.
Hmm.
But like I said, as a league, as one, as a collective, it's not so strong as one would have hoped for, no. But it
Yeah.
does have a lot of things that could potentially make it into a very renowned league. I mean, talent wise and spectacle wise as well, no. The Liguilla, the recently past, was really good, no. The Cruz
Oh,
Azul America series, for example, was
yeah.
amazing. It was one of
Yeah.
the most. It was like a movie, the whole thing.
Yeah. I think my issue, and I think that's a different conversation too, though, is that like you and I have watched enough Mexican soccer where they say, this is our plan. This is what we're doing for the next couple of years. This is what we're gonna do. And then suddenly they don't do that thing.
Or the
Suddenly
guy
there's a
that
new
says it leaves.
it's gonna yes, yes. And suddenly there's a new plan 2 years from there, and then a new guy steps in and says, this is the plan. We're building to blah 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 blah. And we're gonna introduce this league, and there's gonna be this rule. And they drop that rule, and it's just there's a lot of I think there's a bigger conversation about just a lot of short term. Maybe the idea of having long term goals are never actually followed through on, and just what you just see a lot of is just stuff in the short term. And I think that maybe speaks to the league that does have a short season format, that does have coaches who don't last very long. And because the coaches don't last very long, then they're thinking, why am I going to play a lot of these young players
Yeah.
when I'm trying to hold on to my own position? So I think that might be a different conversation here from talk about Ramos and from talk about James, but that is something that the league has to come to terms with when you're talking about what does it want to be. Because yes, I do think that these signings are important. They should continue to make signings like these, but
Yeah.
you also gotta think about those other players too. You also gotta think about those. And let's say with the Realdas, yes, a lot of exciting young players, but really hope that they would give some of those players some more minutes who could be really benefiting Mexican soccer going forward.
Yeah, no, and look, Ramos came to Monterrey to win silverware. No,
Yes.
and when you think about the squads, if you look at Monterrey and León, Monterrey has a better squad than León. I mean, on
Yes.
paper,
Yes.
and they
Yeah.
have to win some type of silverware. Whether it's the league or the CONCACAF Champions Cup, which with Bucetich, I think they won like I don't know 3 or something, or
Three. Yeah, I think it was like three
some
times. Yeah.
sort.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's sort of like they know what it means to win it, and they'll have relatively not easy path, but relatively easy path to a semifinal that could eventually be against Miami. If depending if LAFC and Columbus maybe think otherwise. But Monterrey, I feel with the squad that they have, there needs to be silverware now.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah,
silverware. It's a big failure, I feel like.
yeah. Especially because this is a team. Because like, if someone asked me like, "Oh, what's like give me a summary of Rayados, like in like 2 sentences." I'd be like, spend a lot of money, but don't win much. It's
Mm.
probably just my 2 sentence or 1 sentence summary about this team, which makes it really interesting. Just to pivot to something else that I kind of want to talk about, like is the Club World Cup. I'm not saying they're going to win anything at the Club World Cup, but obviously I wouldn't be surprised if they were to if all the players at their best were to do a little bit of damage here. So with that being said, does that does this speak to the pull of the Club World Cup and also the additional incentive of winning the CONCACAF Champions? Because if Rayados, if Leon weren't in the Club World Cup, I feel like it's pretty easy to say that both those star players, or maybe it would have been just less likely that they would have been there, right? So I think it says a
Yeah.
lot about not only that tournament, but also like suddenly, and I'm looking over here just because I've been paying attention to other kind of soccer over the last few days, and I completely forgot who've been playing the Conca Champions. But you look at a Pumas, you look at a Chivas, you look at America, Cruz Azul, Tigres, who are also in the Conca Champions, and suddenly they're like, okay, obviously there's a financial incentive of being able to win the CONCACAF Champions, which Raylos are also in.
Well, there's also an honor
Mhm.
incentive. For example, with America,
Yes.
three-peat, but no Conca Champions yet. No, so
Yeah.
it's sort of like that's
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
the little pebble in Jardines' shoe. No, it's like I
Hmm.
gotta win that. I gotta win that
Yeah.
because I already won everything else. I gotta win that. So
Yeah.
it's gonna be interesting, and it's not an easy route for America. I mean, yeah, Chivas might not be doing well right now, but it's a different animal now. It's a different tournament.
Yes.
It's a different situation. It's a one game in Guadalajara, one game in Mexico City. A lot of things can happen still. So it's and then if they beat Guadalajara, they'll probably play against Cruz Azul, which is not easy, even though
Yeah.
Anselmi's gone and whatnot. They've been in a chaos as well, trying to. But the Bogusz has been
Yeah.
really good. He's really
He's a
good.
great player. He's a good player, man.
There's like
He's a good player.
no adaptation. He was like he just fell into Mexico City and was like let's play. So it's
Yeah.
been very fun.
Yeah, no, he's been. I mean, I think anybody who's been watching LAFC know a lot about not only how good Bogusz is, but also his versatility. But going back to Ramos and going back to James, like, do you think it's interesting because I think I could with even though Bryles aren't at the top of the table, and I see that Leon are at the top of the table. Do you think that Leon are now legitimate title contenders with James in the picture? Because yeah, we in Liga MX, it's not out of the ordinary for the team that's at the top of the table to not exactly follow through. And then you have, well, let's look at America last season, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't as if they're dominating the full regular season. It was almost like they're working over their like hangover from the last two titles and like, okay, now we're gonna wake up, we're gonna do a little bit of this during the playoffs, boom, win the thing. Tigres, I think you can make the argument that they've done that in the last 10 or so years. So do you do you think that Leon now, top of the table with James now in the picture, do you see them as title contenders? I don't you hear the tone that I'm saying. I don't know
Yeah.
why I'm still a little I don't know.
It's interesting because what I feel is I personally feel that Toto Berizzo is a better coach than Martina Michelis.
Okay.
That's one thing. The second is though I do see deficiencies in the defense for Leon. They're
Yes.
not as strong defensively,
Yeah.
which can change. They'll get repetitions, they'll get more situations of pressure, and that could sort of galvanize the defense and make it better. I think there's still room of improvement, considering they're already at top of the table. There's still room for
Yeah.
improvement for Leon, but I still don't see the team, like I said, with the roster required
Yeah.
to go all the way. Because even though the Michelis is not, in my opinion, a formidable manager, the advantage that the Michelis has is that the squad is so deep. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
insane the way that, right now, even Tecatito's playing good soccer, no, which wasn't the case last season at all. And they still get Lucas Ocampos, that was great, and I think he'll come back and do the same damage on the wing. You know, there's just so many options, no? And I think Leon will be competitive, but I don't know if it will be enough to win a title.
Yeah, and I'm looking through their back line again, and it's just it's 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 tough to feel confident. I guess maybe in a one game situation, right? Maybe in a one game situation against some of the powerhouses of Liga MX, but it's tough look at the back line, and I don't know, like Reyes, I mean, decent player. Barreiro, obviously, like a really important like veteran, but just I don't know.
Yeah,
Frias,
Barreiro's going to be very
I,
important. I think
yeah,
he's critical for the back line.
yeah. So I guess the issue is depth. And I think the issue is not just playing 90 plus minutes of soccer, but 180 plus minutes of soccer against some of these powerhouses. And like you said, I think the issue will be their depth, and maybe then in that situation, maybe if we're tying back to something that we mentioned earlier, in that occasion, then what you need is moments of magic from James to really compensate for those defensive issues, right?
There
And
was
then yeah,
one team in the history of football, I believe, in the Danish league, Midtjylland. Midtjylland is a
mhm,
club that really focused on scoring goals off corner kicks and free
mhm,
kicks. That was sort of like
right.
their sort of, what do you say?
That's
That
just
was
like
their
their philosophy.
signature, their
Yeah,
signature key to victory. In every training session, it would be a focus, like at least an hour of corner kicks and free kicks. You got a specialist in James. I mean, the way
yes,
that he
yes,
just shoots
yeah,
that thing into the box, it's rare
yeah,
when he screws up. It's rare.
yeah,
He has to be hurt or something, or his leg has to be cramped up for it to be a bad cross. So if Leon really emphasizes that and just focuses, I'm not gonna say focus only on that, but they really
right,
put a
right,
lot of
right.
emphasis on that, they can do damage in Liguilla on free kicks
Yeah,
and corner kicks. Because it is a recipe that, in Liga MX, I feel coaches really don't put much attention. But, in other leagues and MLS, of course, I've seen teams that really focus on those plays.
yeah,
But, I do feel that's one way to have an advantage over the other side, no? And it's crazy, but, with Cadiz inside there, Steven Barreiro, those
yes.
are two players you can really, have some advantage in the air, and maybe others will succeed as well. But if you gotta use that advantage that you have, because there's no player with that left foot in Mexico.
And I'm also really curious about that too, because I think that when I'm thinking about the bigger picture for Leon, I feel like it wasn't too long ago. I want to say must have been when was it that they were doing extremely well? It was like 2021,
Was it with
probably. They were like,
Larcamon?
yeah, with Latkova,
A
yeah,
little
like
bit,
around that time. And then they even had like an additional trophy they had won, or at least they followed through like the pre Leagues Cup, and like, okay, these guys are like pretty legitimate. I remember writing an article, like I want to say like a handful of years ago, be like, are we now gonna start to have a conversation about this team not becoming a grande, like in Mexican soccer, but they're making those steps, being like, okay, down the line they could really be making their way up there in Mexican soccer. And you wonder if like James could be a little bit of that key, right, to really take this
nah.
team to the next level. Because I think right now it's easy to say, okay, who are the not gonna say that the four grandes, but let's say who are the powerhouses of Mexican soccer? It's like, well, it's America, it's Rayados, it's Tigres, and then after that, who are the bigger teams after that? It's like, well, it's a mixed bag of, let's say, it could be a Leon, it could be a Toluca, it could be a Cruz Azul, it could be that, but like Leon's in that
Even
conversation, right? Where they're
Santos,
just like,
even
yeah,
Santos, but right now Santos is
yes,
struggling. But they used to be up there.
but Leon have been in that conversation where just like, okay, they're not going to be bottom of the table, they're not going to be mid table, but there's something there that's really that's been consistently there about them.
You
So
know,
I wonder if like yeah, yeah,
And kudos. I mean, that's another thing about Mexico that we haven't. I mean, it's the multi ownership, the multipropiedad.
Right,
You know,
right, right,
kudos to the Martinez family, because when they took over Leon, it was nothing. You know, it was
right.
a club that was very. It was in very difficult situation, and they brought it up, no, and they lifted the team, they lifted the
Hmm.
city, you know, and that, and they proved it with results. It's not just about lifting it a little bit, you know. They've gone on to do great things, but of course it's that topic of how do you deal with the with the ownership, no. And I think that's one thing that is also tough in Mexico.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's once again another conversation altogether. It's like, all right, there shouldn't be multi ownership. It's like, yeah, I agree, and be like, well, who else is to step up? Ooh, I don't
Yeah, yeah. Who's gonna
know.
step up?
But,
Like nobody says,
yeah, it's like,
"Come on, let's go." Yeah,
Querétaro have a Querétaro have like, remember after to bring up the unfortunate case what was happening with Querétaro, and then that Xolos ownership then had to step in to buy that club, and they've been trying to sell that club for I don't know how many years, and how many times have you seen reports which just like, well, yeah, now multi ownership is now done. Let's see who's going to step in. It's just I don't know. There's a
you
lot of interest. Yeah, there's a
the
lot of interesting
ownership,
things.
the ownership in Necaxa also has been sort of like, how is this working now? I mean, you see Eva
Mhm.
Longoria involved and all that. This is actually
Robin
their
Ryan.
first season that they're serious. They're doing stuff. They're
Yeah,
doing very notorious things that are, you know, they.
leading goal
It's not,
scorer. I mean, leading goal
yeah,
scorer right now in Liga MX
it
coming
wouldn't
out.
be
Yeah,
surprising to see Necaxa on the liguilla, you know, at this
yeah,
point.
100%, 100%. Yeah, I'm really curious to see how that pans out. But Nate, before we pivot to other conversations, I think we got just like just a couple minutes here about the big talking point. We talked a lot about Leon there. Any other final thoughts about Rayados or Ramos, and like what he can have potentially have an impact there?
You know, I think Monterrey has a lot of things that are special. I mean, the stadium is amazing. You've been in there.
Yeah,
You know, it's state of the art. It competes. It competes equally with any stadium in Europe.
yeah, yeah,
Sergio Canales has spoken highly of the club. When he's done a lot of interviews with Spanish journalists in the last 3-4 months, and he speaks highly of the team, no, how they take care of the player, the training facility, and the lifestyle in Monterrey is very appropriate. There's a lot they tick a lot of boxes right now. As a
hmm
city, and what it is. It's gonna be a host in the World Cup. And I think even with their eh, equipos femeniles, with Tigres
yeah.
femenil, Rayados,
Well,
they're, they're,
they had the
they're
back
two,
to yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
they're notable institutions in that essence, in both men's and women's. So it is something to put out there, of quality, of really raising the bar. No, of if you really want to be international or global, you got to do a lot of the things that Monterrey and Tigres have been doing. Of course, Tigres lacks the stadium that Monterrey has, but I think that constant, confrontation between those two, the consumption of those teams in that city in particular, it's so big, and it's bigger than the city itself.
Hmm.
That I think really propels those two teams to splash these moves. I mean,
Yes,
it's sort of like, yeah, Ramos arrives to Rayados. What's next? You know what I mean?
yes,
It's sort of like, okay,
yes,
and the
yes,
same goes for
yeah,
Tigres. What's next? Or what are you
yeah,
gonna do now?
yeah.
Cristiano? Or let's see if it happens.
What's interesting about I'm glad you brought that up about Riles because like I mean I'll let people like peek behind the curtain here like about like some of my like writing process, but heading into that final between America and Rayados, I was preparing the two narratives, right? I was like, all right, what am I going to write about with America? It's pretty easy, the three peats, just like and how Cardine like then decided to like be more defensive and then like have like a back line of five. And it really worked well. But
Yeah.
I remember thinking about I was preparing the narrative for Rayados and like it would be really interesting because soccer is a game of margins, and it'd be really interesting how we would be talking about Rayados right now if they had won that title, right? And winning that title, it's just small little differences on the field, and we'd be talking about them in a very different way. And the way that we'd be talking about them right now is being like, yeah, look at the investment that they're making. Like, of course of course they won last season's title. Look at like you said, look at the stadium, look at the roster. Like you said, look at the women's team. It's not just the men's team. Look at the women's team that won back-to-back feminine titles. So like this could have easily been a conversation where it's just like, well, of course, Rayados did this because they that last championship was deserved because of that investment that they made on and off the field. It was deserved because they're really elevating Mexican soccer, right? Like in
Yeah.
many ways. So it's an interesting conversation to have. It's not one that people are having because they didn't win that title. So now we're just like, oh, like we'll see if they're about to, if all that money and all that is that going to pay off. But like they're pretty close. If they had won that, like I said, it'd be a very different conversation to be having about this team.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I mean, there's a lot of luck that plays in the game, no? And America
Mm-hmm.
certainly in this liguilla, they the luck of the champion, how they say, no? It's sort of like
Yeah.
they played on its side, and we'll see. I mean, it's a big challenge in general, no, for the Michelis. Also, kudos to the Michelis because he did came in as a manager in the middle of the season, no? So this is
Yeah. Yeah.
probably his first full season. But then again, when you think about it, is the season that starts in January is not the same as the season that starts in the summer, because in the
Mm-hmm.
summer I feel like there's a better preseason than the one you have now. The one that you have now is
Mm-hmm.
basically 1 or 2 weeks, no, because the players go to vacation, Christmas, New Year's, and they head back, and then they have to start, and combining right now is going to be interesting to see how they do, because to be honest, losing to Mazatlan is not normal, no, for the
Yeah.
squad that they
Yeah.
have, the roster, no. And I think the complications for Monterrey, it will be interesting to see how they deal with the Conca champions and the league
Mm-hmm.
at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like you said, we already saw, that Ramos is not going to be able to play every single game. I think there's going to
Right.
be times where they gotta decide, does he play on this game, or does he
Mm-hmm.
play in the league, or does he play in the Conca champions? And I think those are going to be difficult decisions for the Michelis for sure.
100%. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. Yeah, like how they balance it out. Because obviously, yeah, didn't play the last game. He's expected to play the next game, but I forget exactly what Dimichelis said, but I think it was just along the lines of just like he just came back after what 8 months
Yeah.
off. So yeah, and this is and yes, like he did play well in that first game, but he's still like a 38-year-old player, so he's not exactly the youngest guy. So I am really curious to see how that pans out. But Naiva, and just to close things out here after talking about our big talking points, let's wrap things up here in the last 15 minutes. And I think the first of the small talking points, we'll figure this out later,
The
is
itty bitty
Mexico's.
ones.
There you go. Is the quick updates or quick thoughts on Mexico's preliminary 60-man roster. Now you name every single. No, I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
nah.
Just kidding. What are your? I mean, I was about to say, what are your thoughts? But then again, just like, is there is there really much to say here when there's just such a large collection of players? And yes, we can mention a few of the ones who aren't there, but the few of the ones who aren't there for me are like the young players who just went abroad who are trying to trying to adjust to life in Europe. So
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on that roster?
You
If there's
know,
anything, it's okay to say there's nothing that
I'm
stands
I'm
out,
I'm
right?
happy for players that went to South America and they're on this list. No, Efrain
Hmm.
Alvarez, Rubalcaba, Gil Mora from Tijuana,
Hmm.
the Wonder Kid. I feel good for them. Because they went down there
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
wasn't easy. And I think the win they had in Brazil was very good for their confidence. I feel like the game against River Plate was just something out of a that felt like a Libertadores game,
yeah.
because of
It did.
how tight it was, and just to see the stadium packed and happy, it was insane. So for them, it was significant that. this is what I've been saying this a lot with Vasco Aguirre. This is his third time as Mexican manager. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's sort of like crazy to say that, you know, I've seen him 3 times in my lifetime as a Mexico manager. And so what is going to be his legacy? You know,
Hmm.
because right now his legacy is not so good, to be honest. I mean, he is the
Hmm.
coach that lost against the U.S. in the 2002 World Cup, and
Hmm.
that's not gonna be erased, you know, unless he does something amazing in the next couple of years. And
Hmm.
so it is very it's a very very slippery slope for Vasco right now, because do you make a national team younger by adding these players into the team now, Efrain Alvarez, Rubalcaba, or do you stick with the veterans that have already multiple World Cups in their back and play it out and see what happens? You know, so I think that's gonna be the big debate. Um, it looks like he's leaning more to, you know, he's gonna give a shot to Chucky again by the looks of it, and we'll see what happens. But you know, my question right now is what does he want his legacy to be? You know, and this is it. You know, how do you want to be remembered? And are you want to be remembered by the 2-0 in Korea, Japan, or is there a possibility to salvage something right now? Because as we have seen, hasn't been so consistent in the last years for the national team. But you do have a nice pack of players right now, you know. And
Yes.
so how do you take advantage of that, or and how do you bring in the young players now as well? So it's a lot of moving parts that he has to figure out.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what he does because, like, I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about roster decisions. I'm thinking about the Copa America, with Jimmy Lozano was just like the big headline was just like, oh, Ochoa's not there, Chucky's not there, Raul Jimenez. This is the true transition for El Tri. And then you looked at the actual starting 11s, you're just like, was it transition for all
Nah.
three? Like, was it really like, or was it just outside of those three big names? Maybe another like like maybe like like a couple others not being included. Was it really that big of a transition, or they brought in the young players and they didn't even get any opportunities at all? And the only U23 player who really got opportunities in the Copa America was Santi Gimenez. I think maybe one other player, but I forget who. So I think that's be curious to see how he balances that all out. I think another play that stands out to me, maybe I'm just saying this as a Mexican American myself, but Obed Vargas back in the 60 man, good to see. And also Julian Araujo. Does that I'm wondering if that's a situation in which they're like, sure, we don't know what your health is going to look like for the Nations League, but we're just including you, or is it more so but just like, no, he could be possibly fit, and depending on how things go, maybe he returns to opportunities in Premier League because I think we kind of forget that actually he is still out there in Premier League and he's going through this lengthy recovery and for this team that's actually been doing pretty all right this season.
And
Yeah.
pretty good. No, well, hopefully, you know, even if he doesn't end up playing, if he can make the trip, you know, because I do think
Yeah.
that this camp in particular is going to be very important. You know, it is competitive. It is a title that El Tri hasn't won yet. You know, Canada won't be easy by any means.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, you got to get over that hump first, and then possibly the U.S. with Pochettino. You know, of course, they had that friendly win in Guadalajara that, you know, gives them a little bit of confidence heading into this one. But at the end of the day, it's still a work in progress, no?
100%. Yeah. So I'm really curious to see how it pans out. So yeah, keep an eye on that. Obviously, Mexico still has to figure out their final roster for the Nations League for the semis that'll be coming up, and then also the final. Both will be, I guess, we're recording this February 27th, but will be next month in the LA area. Now let's move on really quickly to Santi Gimenez and what your thoughts are really quickly about his early days. Yeah, we're recording this a couple hours after his team lost, but he got another assist. And I think, at least from my perspective, the guy's getting opportunities. He's already had, I mean, if not even look it up, I was about to look it up right now, but if we're including Champions League, what, 3 goals? 4 goals so far? I might be a little bit off right there, but just like clear at the very least, like making an impact already with
Yeah,
Milan, which
no.
yeah, it's a
Look,
positive sign.
it's a success story so far. Even if the
Yeah.
team is not so strong or hasn't gotten the results, it's unfortunate they were eliminated by Feyenoord in the Champions League.
Yeah.
Which stinks because Santi was there recently, and left a good memory, I would say, with that team in particular. But it's the middle of the season as well, which is kind of tricky. It's sort of like a lot of things can go in the right way or the wrong way because
Right.
they barely switch managers as well. So it's still a work in progress, that team, no? And I think Santi is doing the best of his abilities. I think he's assisting, he's scoring, and the thing that he has to keep doing is continue winning the confidence of the manager, of his teammates, and the fan base. No, and the more goals he scores, the better, because that's gonna win him. It's gonna win him confidence, but it's also gonna hopefully make the team get better results in the next weeks.
100%. And I think that's something else I want to bring up too. Just so like, we don't have to dive into it too much, but just over the next like couple minutes, or a few minutes, do you feel, I mean, you look at that, and then do you also feel like maybe there's like a slight turning point for Mexican soccer when it comes to players not only getting opportunities abroad, but moving abroad? You see Stefano Carrillo not only going to Feyenoord, but getting a debut. I was like, all right, I didn't realize
Yeah,
it'd be that quick. You see Westcas recently, who,
scored no in the conference
who
league.
yeah, scored the Conference League. You see Cesar Huerta, who moved over to Anderlecht, and then also like has been. I mean, things have been like up and down with Anderlecht, but he's been getting like minutes, like week in and week out. You see, like I know it's the Scottish top flight, and make of it what you will for the Scottish top flight, but like you saw a couple players from Rayados go over there. You see over in Belgium, Heriberto Jurado. Like in my brain, I'm like, okay, this is this is good. Either European teams are suddenly like doing their math, and be like, okay, we're not going to sign an Alexis Vega for $900 million. We'll have to look a little bit younger when it comes to these players
Yeah.
where there's high potential in Mexican soccer. But I think that there's something there. Maybe it's all coincidence, but I feel like there's something there with this winter off season.
I think the key to all of this, or what the player has to learn, the Mexican player, is that they have to up their professionalism. When
Yeah,
I see, for example, Edson Alvarez,
yeah,
in the Netherlands, and now in England, he knows English. He's able to communicate with the managers, with his teammates. Um, he adapts to the lifestyle over there. That's example. The same with Santi Gimenez. He adapted right away with Feyenoord, was communicating in English. You know, he put a lot of effort into that. And the coaches and the players, the teammates look at that and they're like, well, this dude actually feels he's responsible and wants to
yeah,
really succeed here. Those are the examples that the young players need to follow. Huescas is speaking English. It might not be the best English, but he's speaking it already.
right,
That
right,
says a lot about him. Johan Vasquez is speaking Italian
yeah,
in Genoa after many years. It wasn't right away that he learned it. It took years. But he learned it. And now he's playing for Patrick Vieira. Patrick Vieira, one of the greatest midfielders that France ever saw. Arsenal certainly wishes they had a Patrick Vieira right now, but they
yeah,
don't. And so this is the thing, no? Those are the examples that the Mexican player has to see. And the more Edson, Santis, Huescas, even Huerta would put it out there. I feel Huerta will
yeah.
learn the language pretty quickly. Ochoa also learned French when he was in France. Those examples right there.
Or Portuguese right now.
Portuguese now, probably he knows it. But the thing is, that is very key. You go to Europe, and you really have to, sacrifice a lot, and make
Mhm.
sure that you make the moves not only on the field but off the field that will propel your career to greater new heights. A lot of people would say, well, Santi from Feyenoord to AC Milan was easy. It wasn't easy. How
Yeah.
many goals did he score in Feyenoord? Like more than 50 goals to get the attention from Milan. And now in Milan, you arrive with a lot of pressure because they let go of Morata and they put him in there, and it's like you gotta score.
Right.
There's no like, oh, I gotta adapt and I gotta adapt
Right.
to my
Yeah,
teammates. No, dude,
they're like Tammy Abraham's the backup. Like you're the starter now,
you're
my
the
dude.
starter
Yeah.
now. And the way that he's taking that was very, very, very special. I mean, a lot of props to him, and hopefully it's for the best. But those are the examples, and that's the thing. In the Europe, people, the scouts, the sporting directors, they got to see something special in the Mexican player. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, you got to be technically gifted when you go over there, but you got to add other things too. How are you in the
Mhm.
dressing room? What do you offer here? The type of leadership that you are. When it gets the pressure mounts, how do you respond to that pressure? And I think that's where the Mexican footballer needs to grow, because many times in critical situations, the Mexican footballer just falls when it's
Mhm.
all the pressure against them.
Yeah.
And I think you garner that mentality by playing in Europe, in the Champions League,
Yes.
in the Europa League, and that's where you make that mentality and you figure it out. So when they come to the national team, you don't only have one player to look up to. Like, for example, many years we just had Rafa. It was like, look at Rafa. What does Rafa do? What is Rafa gonna say? How does he do it? Or how does he do it with the mental aspect? It was just him.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
need we need 10 Rafas on the field
Yes.
in order to aspire to do something one day.
I like that you said that too, because it's not just about becoming better tactically and whatnot, but just like to go out there and be like, okay, I'm going to deal with this adversity and these really tough situations. And that way, in this extremely tough situation I'm dealing with in Europe, and I'm speaking mostly about like on the field here against like really like difficult opposition, then you're like, okay, you learn how to deal with that. And then, like you said, when you come back to make it when you're down in a Nations League game, let's be real. At this point, there's no guarantee Mexico will do well in a Nations League game, in a Copa Oro game, in let's see going forward with the World Cup. Then be like, okay, it's not just like you said, Mexico looking at Edson. I think at this point, be like, okay, like can you take care of things in midfield and really like guide us here? It's not just looking at the defense and be like Vasquez, like you've been killing in Serie A, like please like help us here. Like I love that idea of just being like, okay, having numerous leaders as opposed to just like a couple of different leaders within the starting 11.
That's
Yeah,
that's gonna be the difference. No, and look, one of the things, even in MLS, I've seen it with specifically with Uruguayan footballers.
yeah,
There's an Uruguayan right now in New York Red Bulls, Caraballo, and then
hmm,
there's one that recently arrived in Philadelphia Union. I forget his name right now, Damian something, I believe.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but he
yeah,
barely arrived to Philadelphia Union, and they already speak English.
yeah,
That carries a lot. You win
yeah,
the locker room right away, and the locker room is like, oh, dude, this dude comes from South America and he already knows English, and
hmm,
it takes you a long way. It sort of you surpass a step,
yeah,
that you don't have to worry about when you're over there. Once you know English, then you just focus on the field and
yeah,
try to win over the teammates and the coaching staff.
yeah.
And because of your quality, your technical ability, you will succeed. No, so it is very fundamental for the Mexican footballer. There's a lot of things. The way that you eat, the way that you train, the way that you carry yourself, but also the knowing some English. Because Edson, when he left to Ajax, he already knew something. Santi,
Yeah.
when he went to Feyenoord, he already knew something of English, and it's very, very critical, very fundamental that. Hopefully,
Maybe it help,
Carrillo knows a little bit
yeah,
too.
yeah. Maybe it helps being in Mexico City, where you have a
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
very it's a very intercontinental kind of like it's like metropolitan kind of city. So maybe that
definitely,
helps out a little bit
definitely.
too for some of
Yeah.
those players. All right, Nate, just to close things out over the last few minutes here, let's talk about the CONCACAF Champions Cup. I think maybe I don't know if you have the bracket here pulled up. Maybe I'll start diving into this.
Yeah, I
Um,
have it. I have it
just
open,
okay,
Cesar. Yeah.
okay. You're looking at this. Which let's say which two Liga MX teams that you see from here and the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Obviously, that was a little bit of a difficult path, in round one for a few of those teams. Which two of these Liga MX teams you see going the furthest? in the CONCACAF Champions Cup.
No, I would have to say right now, a bote pronto, or how they say it right away, it's America Monterrey. The final
Yeah.
from the last season. Just
Okay.
seeing it from the first view. I'm intrigued to see what Tigres does with Paunovic. It
Mhm.
hasn't been easy for them, and lately they won't have it easy against Cincinnati. I mean, Cincinnati is a team that has been, they lost Lucho Acosta, but they brought
Yeah.
in this Evander from Portland, and they're cooking. They've been cooking for a while, so it's not going to be an easy opponent. And going to Ohio in the winter, it could be a struggle for Tigres there.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued to see how they do there. If they're going to be able to get out of that series. But yeah, like I said, I think right now from first view, I think America and Monterrey um, have a high probability to be in the final.
100%. I'm not ruling out Tigres either, just because if you're thinking about these situations in two legs, and the Tigres do have the depth, like more depth than most of these teams in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, they'll be doing all right. But what that brings up though is that it is interesting. So you're saying that there's a decent chance, and I guess if you were a betting person, there is a decent chance that you would have a semifinal between Rayados and Inter Miami, which would be absolutely fascinating if that was a
Bonkers,
possibility. Yeah, if that was a
bonkers.
possibility, yeah, because that's actually a possibility right there.
And look,
Uh,
right now they're healthy. Luis
yeah,
Suarez, Messi, Jordi Alba, and Sergio Busquets are healthy. If they stay healthy, it won't be easy for Monterrey. I mean, it's insane what they're doing. At their age, and at times it just looks like it's adults against kids.
yeah,
To be honest, that's how it feels like, and it's sort of like, in the recent game of Miami against New York City. Um, Miami played down a man for a good part of the game, 60 minutes
yeah.
or so.
After that red,
But
yeah,
there
yeah,
was always that sense that they were not going to lose because Messi was playing. And
yeah,
and it just happened at the end. They tied the game 2-2. And, if it hadn't been for some technical mistakes in the back for Miami, they could have easily won it with 10 men. So
yeah,
that's just when they're healthy. If they one of them drops, for example, Jordi's not healthy or Busquets is not healthy when it comes to the series against Monterrey, then Monterrey will definitely have an advantage. But if those four are healthy against Monterrey, it won't be easy. It's definitely going to be something to watch.
yeah. 100%. I'm really excited to see how that pans out. Really excited to see how the rest of the Liga MX season pans out, how the next call up looks like for El how things go for Ramos, how things go for James, and obviously for Nayib over here on the Mexican Soccer Show. And welcome back, man. I just want to say really quickly before we close out. Welcome back again, man. It's always nice to chat with you. It's be really cool to have you and Lizzie at the same time talking about Mexican soccer. And yeah, man. I say welcome back as if you weren't, as if we had to bring you back. I feel like we had to since you're one of the OGs, I feel like it's not up to us like you returning to the show or not. But yeah,
No,
man,
it, it just
it's nice to meet
it,
you.
it happens like I said. I mean, right now I'm not as active as I used to be on Twitter, now known as X. I'm active more a little bit on Blue Sky. I'm trying to return to that mojo of being out there more often. And but I'm always watching. The
Yeah,
Liga MX, El Tri, and everything that happens there. So for me, it's gonna be a great pleasure to try to give it a little bit of more life to the Mexican soccer show, and hopefully the listeners will enjoy it.
yeah, man, yeah, man. Well, glad to have you back once again. Glad to chat with you, and just always always a good time, man. Just
Always a
chatting
good
with you
time. We
about
did
soccer.
so many good things, Cesar. We did pretty well today. It felt like I never left.
There you go. Well, thank you all to listeners, especially the OG ones, the ones who were listening before me, actually the ones who were listening alongside me back in the day. Thank you to producer Amy for
Yeah,
uploading this
thank you to
pod.
Amy. And
Uh, yeah, and then see that was our only misstep. We were an hour and 9 minutes into the show. And that was our
yeah.
only misstep, but there was an awkward silence. but thank you to everybody. Thank you, Amy. And then yeah, we'll see you on the next episode of the Mexican Soccer Show. Never mind. See, now you got me. Now you got me stuck by the Mexican Soccer Show. I'll see y'all around, guys.